a spilled glass of 1982 Chateau Margaux. That was the only trigger required to dismantle a $4 billion empire. On a freezing Tuesday night in Manhattan, Richard Blackwood, the ruthlessly arrogant CEO of Apex Meridian, decided to destroy a waitress's life for sport. He thought she was nobody, just another disposable face in a cheap uniform. He was wrong. In the time it took for the wine to stain the tablecloth, the balance of power shifted. Within 20 minutes, the doors would lock, the police would be called, and the board of directors would be terminated. But the real twist, they didn't see who was actually holding the gun. The distinct rhythmic clack, clack, clack of polished Oxfords on marble echoed through the lobby of the Obsidian Room. It was the sound of money. Not just rent money or mortgage money, but the kind of money that buys senators and silences scandals. It was 7:45 p.m. on a Tuesday in November 2023. Outside New York City was being battered by a freezing sleet that turned the streets into grey slush. Inside, the air was perfumed with white truffles, beeswax candles, and the subtle metallic scent of anxiety. Audrey adjusted her apron in the service station, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't shaking from the cold, but from exhaustion. She had been on her feet for 10 hours straight. Her lower back throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache, a reminder of the double shifts she had pulled 6 days a week for the last 3 months. "Table 4 is yours, Audrey." The maitre d' stiff man named Jean-Luc, with a moustache that looked glued on, hissed as he passed her. "And fix your hair. You look like you've been running a marathon." Audrey tucked a stray strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Yes, Jean-Luc. Who's the reservation?" Jean-Luc stopped. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "The reservation," he said, dropping his voice to a reverent whisper, "is the Blackwood party. The entire executive board of Apex Meridian. Do not, and I cannot stress this enough, do not breathe unless they give you permission." Audrey's stomach dropped. Everyone in the city knew Richard Blackwood. He was the predatory face of modern capitalism, a man who had recently acquired the historic manufacturing giant, Stanton Steel, only to strip its assets, fire 4,000 workers in the Midwest, and pocket a $60 million bonus in the same week. He was currently on the cover of Forbes with the headline, "The Butcher of Wall Street." She nodded, grabbing her tray. "Understood." As she walked out onto the floor, the atmosphere shifted. The restaurant, usually a hum of polite conversation, seemed to gravitate toward the center booth. There were 8 of them. 7 men and 1 woman, all dressed in bespoke suits that cost more than Audrey's entire college tuition. In the center sat Richard Blackwood. He was younger than he looked in the papers, perhaps in his early 40s, with slicked back, dark hair and eyes that looked like shark glass. He wasn't sitting. He was lounging, taking up more space than one man needed, his arm draped over the back of the leather banquette as if he owned the building. "I told the SEC to check the fine print on the 13D filings," Richard was saying, his voice booming slightly too loud for the room. "If they want to audit us, let them. By the time they find the shell companies in the Caymans, we'll have liquidated the pension fund and moved the IP to Dublin." The table erupted in sycophantic laughter. To his right sat Desmond Pierce, the CFO, a man with a nervous tic who constantly checked his Rolex Daytona. To his left was Victoria Vance, Victoria Hale, the chief legal officer, who was sipping a martini with a look of predatory boredom. Audrey approached the table, her heart hammering against her ribs. She needed this job. Her brother's dialysis treatments weren't covered by their basic insurance, and the debt collectors had started calling her personal cell phone. She couldn't afford a mistake. "Good evening," Audrey said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome to the Obsidian Room." My name is Audrey, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start the table with some—" Richard didn't look up. He didn't even pause his conversation. He simply held up a hand palm, facing her face, silencing her like she was a barking dog. "So I told the union rep," Richard continued staring at Desmond, "that if he wanted a severance package he could sell his kidney. The man actually cried. Can you believe it, Tears? Over a pension?" The board members chuckled, though Audrey noticed Desmond looked away, focusing on his bread plate. Audrey stood frozen. The humiliation burned her cheeks. She was an object to them less than the furniture. She waited. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. Finally, Richard turned his head slowly. He looked at her waist, then her name tag, and finally, with a look of mild disgust, her face. "Water," he said. "Sparkling. No ice. And bring the sommelier. I don't want a waitress reading me the wine list. You wouldn't know a Bordeaux from grape juice." "Of course, sir," Audrey said, her voice steady despite the rage boiling in her gut. As she turned to leave, she heard Victoria Hale whisper, loud enough to be heard, "Where do they find these people? She looks like she sleeps in a library." "Cheap labor. Victoria." Richard replied, his voice dripping with amusement. "That's how we keep the margins up. You squeeze the help until they break, then you replace them." Audrey gripped the tray so hard her knuckles turned white. If they only knew. If they only knew that she wasn't sleeping in a library, but she was certainly spending her nights in one. She was finishing her master's in forensic accounting at Columbia, studying the very loopholes men like Richard use to destroy families like hers. But tonight, she wasn't a forensic accountant. She was just the help, and the night was only beginning. By 8:30 p.m., the Blackwood table had consumed 3 bottles of wine, and the volume of their conversation had risen from arrogant to belligerent. The restaurant was filling up. At a corner table, a quiet, elderly man in a tweed suit was eating alone, reading a newspaper. Audrey had served him tea earlier, Earl Grey, 2 sugars. He was polite, tipped well, and seemed to be watching the room with sharp, observant eyes. Back at the center table, Richard Blackwood was holding court. He was high on power, intoxicated by his own perceived invincibility. "We need to discuss the board vote on Friday," Desmond said, leaning in. "The vote to oust the chairman. Are we sure we have the numbers? If old man Galloway wakes up from his coma, or if his estate proxies vote against us?" Richard slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Galloway is a vegetable. Desmond, he's done. I own this board. I own the voting block. As of Friday morning, I become chairman and CEO. And the first thing I'm doing is selling off the R&D division to the Chinese. It's a quick $2 billion in cash." Audrey was pouring water into Victoria's glass when she heard this. Her hand faltered for a microsecond. Selling R&D. That was the heart of Apex Meridian. That division was researching affordable cancer screenings. Selling it would kill the project, but make the board rich. She finished pouring and reached for the empty wine bottle to clear it. "Excuse me," Richard barked. Audrey froze. "Yes, sir. Did I say you could clear that?" "It's empty, sir. I thought—" "You thought?" Richard laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "You're not paid to think. You're paid to fetch. That bottle is a 1982 Margot. It's worth more than your life. I want to look at the label while I finish my duck." "I apologize," Audrey said, lowering her head. "Apologies are for the weak," Richard sneered. He looked around the table, performing for his audience. "You know this is the problem with the economy. Unskilled labor, thinking they have autonomy. Look at her." He gestured to Audrey, as if she were a specimen in a jar. "Shoes are scuffed. Apron is stained. She probably thinks she deserves a living wage." Victoria Hale giggled. "Richard, behave. You're going to make her cry." "Let her cry." Richard said, his eyes cold and dead. "Tears are just salt water. Useless." He reached for his wine glass, but his movements were sloppy. His elbow clipped the edge of the heavy crystal goblet. Time seemed to slow down. The glass tipped. The dark red liquid, a vintage costing $4,000 a bottle, surged over the rim. It splashed across the pristine white tablecloth and cascaded onto Richard's bespoke Italian suit pants. The table went silent. Richard stood up so fast his chair flew backward and crashed onto the floor. The sound silenced the entire restaurant. Even the kitchen staff froze. "You stupid cow!" Richard roared. Audrey gasped, grabbing a napkin. "Sir, I'm so sorry, I can help. Don't touch me!" Richard swatted her hand away violently. The napkin fluttered to the floor. "Do you know what this suit costs? Do you have any idea who I am? It was an accident. The glass tipped. Because you crowded me." Richard lied. Everyone at the table knew he had knocked it over himself, but no one spoke. They were sharks, but they were afraid of the great white. Desmond looked down. Victoria checked her phone. Richard stepped closer to Audrey, invading her personal space. He loomed over her, smelling of expensive wine and expensive cologne. "You are incompetent," he hissed loud enough for the back of the room to hear. "You are a genetic dead end. You exist to serve your betters, and you can't even do that right." Audrey's chin trembled. She fought back the tears. She thought of her brother. She had to keep this job. "I will pay for the dry cleaning, sir. Please." Richard laughed. "You pay." "You couldn't afford the thread in the buttons?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a money clip. He peeled off a crisp $100 bill. "Here," he said. He crumbled the bill into a ball and threw it. It bounced off Audrey's chest and landed in the puddle of wine on the floor. "Pick it up," Richard commanded. Audrey stared at him. "Excuse me, I said pick it up. That's your tip, but you have to earn it. Kneel down and pick it up." The restaurant was deathly quiet. The air conditioning hummed. The elderly man in the corner lowered his newspaper. "Sir, that's not necessary." The maître de Jean-Luc stepped in nervously. "Mr. Blackwood, please." "Shut up, Jean-Luc, or I'll buy this building and turn it into a parking lot." Richard snapped, never taking his eyes off Audrey. "Well, I'm waiting. Kneel." Audrey looked at the bill on the floor. It was soaking up the red wine, looking like a bloody wound on the white marble. She looked at Richard. She saw the malice in his eyes. He wanted to break her. He wanted to prove that his money made him a god and her a peasant. She looked at the board members. Desmond, the CFO, looked uncomfortable. He knew this was a PR nightmare waiting to happen, but he was too cowardly to stop it. Audrey took a deep breath. She thought about walking away. She thought about throwing a drink in his face. But then she remembered something. She remembered a file she had read during her internship at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office 3 years ago. A file about a shell company named Orion Holdings. A file that linked back to a man named Blackwood. She realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a rude customer. This was the man who had laid off her father 5 years ago, leading to the stress that caused his heart attack. Audrey didn't kneel. Instead, she stood up straighter. The exhaustion vanished from her face, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Her eyes, previously filled with fear, hardened into steel. She looked Richard Blackwood dead in the eye. "No," she said. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Richard blinked. He looked like he had been slapped. "What did you say to me?" "I said no." Audrey repeated, her voice gaining strength. "I won't kneel for you, and I think you've had enough to drink, Mr. Blackwood. I'm cutting you off." Richard's face turned a violent shade of purple. A vein in his forehead bulged. "You're firing me," he whispered, a dangerous low sound. A waitress is cutting me off." He turned to the table. "Did you hear that she thinks she has power?" He turned back to Audrey, a cruel grin spreading across his face. "You're fired. Jean-Luc, get this trash out of here immediately. And call the police. I want her charged with assault. She threw the wine on me." "I did no such thing," Audrey cried out. "It's her word against mine," Richard said smoothly, adjusting his cuffs. "And I have 7 witnesses right here who saw you attack me." He looked at his board. "Isn't that right? Desmond Victoria." Desmond hesitated. He looked at the girl, then at his boss. He swallowed hard. "Yes," Desmond lied, his voice cracking. She threw the glass. It was unprovoked." Victoria nodded, not looking up from her phone. "Assault? Definitely." Richard smirked. "See, you're done. You're going to jail and you'll never work in this city again." Jean-Luc grabbed Audrey's arm. "Audrey, please just go to the back." "Get your hands off her." The voice came from the corner of the room. It was soft, raspy, but it carried an authority that made the air in the room freeze. Everyone turned. The elderly man in the tweed suit was standing up. He folded his newspaper neatly and placed it on the table. He picked up his cane and walked slowly toward the center of the room. Richard rolled his eyes. "Go back to your soup, Grandpa. This doesn't concern you." The old man didn't stop. He walked right up to the puddle of wine, ignoring Richard completely. He looked at Audrey. "Are you all right, my dear?" the old man asked. I think so," Audrey stammered. She recognized him now. She hadn't realized it when she served the tea, but she knew that profile. Every finance student knew that profile. The old man turned to Richard. "You have made a grave error this evening, Mr. Blackwood." Richard scoffed. "And who are you supposed to be, another peasant?" The old man smiled, but it was a smile that promised violence. "My name," the old man said, "is William Galloway, and as of this morning I woke up." Richard's face went white. The color drained from his skin so fast he looked like a corpse. William Galloway, the chairman. The man Richard had just claimed was a vegetable. The man whose company Richard was trying to steal. "Impossible," Richard whispered. You're in a coma in Zurich." Galloway said. "I recovered 3 days ago. I decided to fly back quietly to see how my company was being managed in my absence. I wanted to see the man who claimed to be my successor." Galloway looked at the wine on the floor, then at the terrified board members. "And what I found," Galloway continued, his voice hardening, "is a boardroom of cowards led by a sociopath." "William, wait." Richard stammered, his arrogance replaced by panic. "I can explain. This is just a misunderstanding. The girl was clumsy. I was just teaching her a lesson about standards." "Oh, you taught a lesson, all right," Galloway interrupted. "But you missed the most important detail." Galloway turned to Audrey and bowed his head slightly. "Audrey," Galloway said, "would you like to introduce yourself to your employees?" Richard looked between the old man and the waitress. What are you talking about?" Audrey took a step forward. She looked at Richard, then at the trembling Desmond. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out not an order pad, but a black, secure ID badge. "My name is Audrey Galloway," she said, her voice clear and ringing. "William is my grandfather, and I own 51% of the voting shares in Apex Meridian via the family trust." The silence that followed was louder than a scream. The silence in the obsidian room was heavy, suffocating. It felt less like a restaurant and more like a courtroom just before the gavel drops. Richard Blackwood stared at the young woman he had just ordered to her knees. His brain was misfiring, trying to reconcile two impossible realities. On one side, the smudge of dirt on her apron, the cheap, comfortable shoes of a service worker, and the tray of dirty napkins she had dropped. On the other, the steel in her voice, and the terrified reverence of William Galloway standing beside her. Richard forced a laugh. It was a wet, jagged sound. This is Rich," Richard stammered, looking around at his board members for support. "This is a prank, right? Is this some kind of hidden camera show? Did the marketing team set this up for a viral moment?" He pointed a shaking finger at Audrey. "You almost had me. Good acting. Really. Now, where are the cameras?" "There are cameras. Mr. Blackwood," Audrey said, her voice dropping the polite customer service octave she had used for months, replaced by a low, resonant tone that sounded terrifyingly like her grandfather's. "There's a CCTV camera above the bar, one by the entrance, and one pointed directly at this table. We installed the 4K upgrade last week. It recorded everything. The wine, the insult, the assault." "Assault?" Richard spat, stepping back. "I didn't touch you. You threw money at me," Audrey replied calmly. "In the state of New York, throwing an object at an employee in a menacing manner constitutes harassment and battery. But that's the least of your worries." Victoria Hale, the chief legal officer, finally spoke up. She was pale, her martini glass trembling in her hand. Her legal mind was racing, calculating liability. "Richard," she whispered, "shut up." "Don't tell me to shut up, Victoria." Richard roared, his panic turning into aggression. "This is a fraud. William Galloway is incapacitated. I have the medical reports." William Galloway tapped his cane on the floor. Click, click. The reports were exaggerated, the old man said softly. "A stroke is a difficult thing, Richard. It takes time, but it also gives one time to think. Time to review the quarterly reports my granddaughter brought me every Sunday." Richard froze. She was visiting you. Who do you think was paying her tuition?" William smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Audrey isn't just my granddaughter, Richard. She is the executor of the Galloway Family Trust. When I went into the coma, the bylaws state that the voting rights don't pass to the CEO. They revert to the bloodline, specifically to the golden shareholder." William gestured to Audrey's badge. "She has been the majority shareholder of Apex Meridian for 6 months, William said. "She owns you." Richard's face contorted. "If she's so rich," he sneered desperately, looking for a hole in their story. "Why is she serving me duck confit? Why is she scrubbing tables? Why is she letting me humiliate her?" Audrey took a step forward. She didn't look tired anymore. She looked predatory. "Because, Richard," Audrey said, "I needed to know if the rumors were true. I couldn't just audit the books. You cook those too well. Desmond hides the losses in shell companies. Victoria buries the lawsuits in arbitration." She looked at the other board members. "I needed to see the culture. I needed to see how you treat people when you think no one of consequence is watching." She looked down at the wine stain on the floor. "And tonight," she whispered, "you showed me exactly who you are." Suddenly the red and blue flash of lights washed over the front windows. Sirens wailed, cutting through the snowy night. Richard's eyes lit up. "The police!" he gasped. A twisted grin returned to his face. "I called them. You're done. You can pretend to be whoever you want, but you're wearing a uniform and I'm wearing a $10,000 suit. Who do you think they're going to believe?" The front doors burst open. 2 NYPD officers stomped in, shaking the sleet off their heavy coats. Their hands were near their holsters, scanning the room for the disturbance Richard had screamed about on the phone. "We got a call about an assault," the lead officer, A burly sergeant named Miller barked. "Who's the victim?" "I am," Richard shouted, stepping over the velvet rope. He pointed an accusing finger at Audrey. "Officer, thank God. This woman is unhinged. She threw wine on me. She threatened me. And now she's impersonating a corporate officer. I want her arrested immediately for assault and fraud." Officer Miller looked at Richard, taking in the expensive suit and the wine stain. Then he looked at Audrey in her apron. It was a tableau the police saw every day, rich guy versus service worker. Usually the rich guy won. Miller walked over to Audrey, pulling out his handcuffs. "Ma'am, step away from the table. Put your hands where I can see them." "Officer, wait," William Galloway tried to interject, moving forward. "Stay back, sir," Miller warned William. He grabbed Audrey's wrist. "Ma'am, turn around." "Don't resist," Richard crowed, practically vibrating with glee. "She's dangerous. Check her pockets." Audrey didn't resist. She didn't struggle. She simply looked Officer Miller in the eye. "Officer," she said calmly, "before you put those on, I suggest you ask the gentleman to your left for the footage from security camera 3. Miller paused. "What? And?" Audrey continued. "You might want to check the ID in my pocket, the one next to the serving pad. It's a badge for the New York State Bar Association. I'm a licensed attorney, officer. And if you arrest me based on the false testimony of a man who is currently intoxicated, I will have your precinct facing a civil rights lawsuit by morning." Miller hesitated. He looked at Richard. "Sir, have you been drinking?" I had a few glasses of wine," Richard sputtered. "But that's irrelevant. She's the help." Jean-Luc the maître d', who had been cowering by the kitchen door, suddenly made a decision. He saw the tide turning. He saw the old man. He saw the confidence in Audrey's eyes. Jean-Luc stepped forward. "Officer," Jean-Luc said, his voice trembling but clear. "Mr. Blackwood is lying." Richard whipped around. "Jean-Luc, you traitorous little—" "Mr. Blackwood knocked the wine over himself," Jean-Luc said, standing tall for the first time in years. "He was drunk. He threw money at Audrey. He demanded she kneel. She did not touch him." "Liar," Richard screamed. "I'll buy this place and burn it down." "And," Jean-Luc added, pointing to the other guests, "every table here saw it." The elderly couple in the corner nodded. A businessman at table 5 raised his hand. "I saw it too, officer. The guy is a bully." Officer Miller let go of Audrey's wrist. He looked at Richard with a distinct lack of sympathy. "Sir," Miller said, his voice dropping an octave, "I think you need to calm down. You're making a disturbance." "I'm the CEO of Apex Meridian." Richard shrieked, his composure fracturing completely. "I don't make disturbances. I make the GDP go up. You can't touch me." "Actually," Audrey's voice cut through the noise like a scalpel, "you're not." She reached into her apron, but not for a weapon. She pulled out a smartphone. "Officer Miller, thank you for securing the scene," Audrey said. "But this is now a private, corporate matter. Unless Mr. Blackwood wants to press charges and have the security footage played in open court." She raised an eyebrow at Richard. Richard paled. If the footage got out, him screaming, slurring, abusing a waitress, the stock price would tank before he could sell his shares. He was trapped. "Fine," Richard hissed. "No charges, just get her out of my sight." "I'm not going anywhere, Richard," Audrey said. She turned to Jean-Luc. "Jean-Luc, lock the front door. Put up the closed for private event sign." "Yes, Miss Galloway," Jean-Luc said, rushing to the door. Audrey turned back to the table of terrified executives. She gestured to the empty chair at the head of the table, Richard's chair. "Sit down, Richard," she commanded. "I'm leaving," Richard said, moving toward the door. "If you walk out that door," William Galloway said, leaning on his cane. "You forfeit your severance, your stock options, and I will personally release the internal audit of the Stanton Steel acquisition to the FBI by midnight." Richard stopped dead. His hand hovered over the door handle. The Stanton Steel deal. The dirty secret. Slowly defeated, Richard Blackwood turned around. He walked back to the table and sank into his chair, the wine still wet on his trousers. Audrey uninvited the apron. She tossed it onto the floor right on top of the crumpled $100 bill Richard had thrown at her. Beneath the apron she was wearing a simple black dress, but she carried herself like a queen. She walked to the head of the table. "I am calling this emergency meeting of the Board of Directors of Apex Meridian to order," Audrey announced. "The time is 9:15 p.m. The first item on the agenda is a performance review." She looked at the 7 most powerful people in the room. "And I have notes." The atmosphere in the Obsidian Room had shifted from a restaurant to an execution chamber. The other diners had been quietly comped their meals and ushered out the side exit by Jean-Luc, leaving only the board, the police, who were asked to stay as impartial witnesses by Audrey and the Galloways. Audrey stood at the head of the table. She didn't sit. She paced slowly behind the executives, circling them like a shark circling a life raft. "Let's start with you, Desmond," Audrey said, stopping behind the CFO's chair. Desmond Pierce flinched. He was sweating so profusely his glasses were slipping down his nose. "Ms. Galloway, I had no idea. If I had known, it was you. If you had known it was me, you wouldn't have discussed the Project Chimera tax evasion scheme while eating your lobster bisque," Audrey said. Desmond's blood ran cold. That was just theoretical." "Theoretical." Audrey pulled a small notepad from her back pocket. It was cheap, spiral-bound, stained with coffee. "November 4th. Table 2. You told Victoria that you were routing the pension funds through a shell company in Malta to avoid the new federal regulations. You called it a victimless crime because, and I quote, "the retirees will be dead before they notice the shortfall." Desmond couldn't breathe. The silence at the table was deafening. "That's a felony, Desmond," Audrey said softly. "Fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse." "I was following orders," Desmond squeaked, pointing a trembling finger at Richard. "He made me do it. He said if I didn't find the cash for the dividend payout, he'd fire me." "So you stole from our workers?" William Galloway said from the side, his voice filled with disappointment. "Desmond, I hired you out of grad school. I trusted you." "I'm sorry, William." Desmond sobbed, putting his head in his hands. "You're fired," Audrey said. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. If you cooperate with the SEC investigation, we might not press charges." "Might?" Desmond scrambled out of his chair, nodding frantically, and practically ran toward the door past the confused police officers. "One down," Audrey said. She continued her walk. She stopped behind Victoria Hale. The chief legal officer was tougher than Desmond. She wasn't crying. She was angry. "This is entrapment," Victoria hissed. "You can't use conversations overheard in a private setting as evidence. I'll have this thrown out of court." "It wasn't a private setting, Victoria," Audrey countered. "It's a public restaurant. You have no expectation of privacy here, especially when you're shouting about bribing a zoning official in Chicago." Victoria stiffened. October 12th. Audrey read from her notebook. "You were drinking a Pinot Grigio. You were on the phone with a councilman regarding the new factory. You authorized a $50,000 consulting fee to his wife's interior design firm in exchange for the environmental permits." Audrey leaned down, whispering in Victoria's ear. "I checked the firm, Victoria. It doesn't exist. It's a ghost, LLC. That's bribery of a public official, disbarment, prison. Victoria's arrogance crumbled. She looked at Richard. You said that line was secure. You said you had the phones swept. I thought I did. Richard snapped. You're fired, Victoria, Audrey said, and I'll be reporting that bribe to the Bar Association myself tomorrow morning. Victoria grabbed her purse and stormed out, her heels clicking angrily on the marble. Audrey turned her attention to the rest of the board, the VP of Operations, the head of HR, the director of marketing. Does anyone else want me to read from the notebook? Audrey asked, holding it up. I have pages on the safety violations in the Ohio plant. I have notes on the sexual harassment settlements HR buried last summer. I even have a very interesting entry about the marketing budget being used to pay for Richard's private jet vacations. The remaining 4 board members looked at each other. They stood up in unison. We resign, the VP of Operations said quickly. Smart choice, Audrey nodded. Leave. Now. They fled. Within 3 minutes, the table was empty, except for Richard Blackwood. He sat alone in the center of the wreckage of his empire. The wine stain on his pants had dried into a dark, crusty patch. He looked small. Audrey walked around the table and sat directly across from him. William sat next to her. Well, Richard, Audrey said, crossing her arms, it's just us. Richard looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. The fight was draining out of him, but the desperation was ramping up. He needed a leverage point. He needed a card to play. You can't fire me, Richard said, his voice raspy. Not without cause. My contract has a golden parachute. If you terminate me, you owe me $40 million. It's in the bylaws. Clause 14, Section B. William Galloway recited from memory. The moral turpitude clause. Any executive who engages in conduct that brings public shame or disrepute to the company forfeits all severance and stock options. This isn't public, Richard argued. It's a private restaurant. No one knows. Audrey smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Actually, Richard, she said, do you remember the boy who busses the tables, Kevin? The one you yelled at last week for dropping a fork. Who cares? Kevin is a streamer. He has a channel. He started live streaming the moment you stood up and started screaming at me. Richard's blood turned to ice. He whipped his head around. Standing near the kitchen door holding a phone up was a young busboy. He gave Richard a little wave. Say hi to the internet, Richard, Audrey said. There are currently, how many Kevin Fraud? 40,000 watching live, Kevin called out. Chat is going crazy. They're calling him the Wine Karen. Richard slumped back in his chair. It was over. The reputation he had built for 20 years, the tough, untouchable titan of industry, was gone. He was a meme, a joke. You set me up, Richard whispered. I served you dinner, Audrey corrected. You set yourself up. So what happens now? Richard asked, his voice hollow. You fire me. I go home. I still have millions in the bank. Audrey shook her head. You really weren't paying attention to the notebook, were you? She flipped to the last page. The Stanton Steel acquisition, Audrey said. You leveraged Apex Meridian's assets to buy it, but you didn't buy it for the company. You bought it through a holding company you own, intending to lease the assets back to us at a markup. That's self-dealing. That's theft of corporate opportunity. She placed the notebook on the table. I've already sent this to the district attorney, Audrey said. Officer Miller. The police officer stepped forward. He had been listening intently. Yeah, Miller asked. I believe you have probable cause to detain Mr. Blackwood now, not for the assault, but for grand larceny and securities fraud. The evidence is all digital, and he's a flight risk. He has a plane fueled up at Teterboro right now. Richard stood up, knocking his chair over. You can't do this. I'm Richard Blackwood. Hands behind your back, Officer Miller said, grabbing Richard's arm and spinning him around. The handcuffs clicked a sharp final sound. William, tell her to stop, Richard begged as he was marched toward the door. I made you money. I made us all money. William Galloway didn't look at him. He was looking at his granddaughter with pride. You made money, Richard, William said softly, but you lost your soul, and tonight you lost everything else. As the police dragged Richard out into the snow screaming about his lawyers, the restaurant fell silent again. Audrey let out a long breath, her shoulders slumping slightly. The adrenaline was fading. Are you okay? William asked, placing a hand on her arm. Audrey looked at the empty table, the half-eaten food, the spilled wine. I'm tired, Grandpa, she said. My feet hurt, and I have a board meeting to prep for tomorrow. We can cancel it, William said. No. Audrey stood up, smoothing her dress. We have 4,000 workers at Stanton Steel who think they're losing their jobs. I need to go tell them they're safe. We have work to do. She looked at Jean-Luc. Jean-Luc? Yes, Ms. Galloway. The maitre d' answered, bowing deeply. Table 4 needs to be bussed, she said with a tired smile. And bring me the 1982 Margot, the real bottle. I think I've earned a glass. The hangover of power is worse than the hangover from wine. The morning after the incident at the Obsidian Room, Audrey Galloway stood in the center of the CEO's office on the 45th floor of the Apex Meridian Tower. The room was vast, glass-walled, and cold. It smelled of lemon polish and Richard Blackwood's lingering cologne. Below her, New York City was waking up, but the internet never slept. It's trending, Ms. Galloway, said Ben, the young social media manager, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He projected a graph onto the wall. The hashtag WineKaren is the #1 topic globally, but there's a counter-narrative forming. Audrey turned away from the window. She was wearing a navy power suit now, not an apron, but she felt more exposed than she ever had waiting tables. What kind of counter-narrative? Ben hesitated. Richard made bail at 4 a.m. His lawyers Sterling and Cooper released a statement an hour ago. They aren't denying the video. They're recontextualizing it. Ben played a clip on the screen. It was Richard standing on the steps of the precinct, looking disheveled but defiant. He wasn't apologetic. He was on the attack. This was a corporate coup, Richard shouted into the microphones, his eyes wild. The Galloway family entrapped me. They placed an agent, the heiress herself, in a lowly position to bait me into a reaction. It was a setup designed to void my contract so they wouldn't have to pay me my severance. I am the victim of a conspiracy. And let me tell you, while they were playing dress-up as waitresses, I was making you shareholders money. The stock has dropped 12% since my arrest. Do you want a waitress running your 401k, or do you want a shark? Audrey felt a chill. He was good. He was twisting his own cruelty into a narrative of competence. I am a jerk, but I make you rich. It was a seductive lie for Wall Street. The stock is plummeting, William Galloway said, entering the room. He looked older today, the energy of the previous night fading. The institutional investors are panicked. They don't like uncertainty and they don't like Waitress CEOs. Richard is rallying the hedge funds. He's calling for an emergency shareholder vote to reinstate him and remove the family trust from control. He can't do that, Audrey said. We own the golden share. He's challenging the mental competency of the golden shareholder. William sighed, sitting heavily on the leather sofa. He claims I'm senile, and that you manipulated me into signing the proxy. If a judge freezes our shares, Richard wins. He gets back in the building, and once he's back, he'll shred everything. Audrey looked at the desk, Richard's desk. It was clean. Too clean. "He's hiding something, Grandpa," Audrey said. "Richard isn't fighting this hard just for the money. He has 40 million stashed away. He could retire. He's fighting because he's afraid. He's afraid of what we'll find if we dig deep enough." She walked over to the computer. It was locked, encrypted with military-grade security. "Get the IT team," Audrey ordered Ben. "I want this drive cracked. I want his emails, his deleted files, his drafts, everything." "We tried," Ben said nervously. "It's wiped. He had a remote kill switch. The moment he was arrested, a script ran. The servers are blank." Audrey slammed her hand on the desk. "Nothing is ever truly gone. What about the physical files?" "The archives. The Iron Mountain storage facility in New Jersey," William noted. "But we need a manifest key to find anything in that warehouse. It's acres of boxes." Audrey closed her eyes. She thought back to the restaurant, to the arrogant conversation Richard was having with Desmond. They weren't just bragging about profits. They were bragging about shortcuts. The union rep cried, "I told him to sell a kidney." "Stanton Steel," Audrey whispered. "What?" "The manufacturing plant in Ohio." Audrey said, her eyes snapping open. "That was his crown jewel acquisition. He stripped the assets. If there's a smoking gun, it's not in a server in New York. It's in the Rust Belt." She hit the intercom. "Jean-Luc, I know you're technically a maître d'œuvre, but how would you like a promotion to head of corporate security?" Jean-Luc's voice crackled through. "It would be my pleasure, madam." "Get the jet ready," Audrey said, grabbing her coat. "We're going to Ohio." The corporate jet landed in Cleveland under a heavy grey sky. The air here tasted different, metallic heavy. It was a stark contrast to the perfumed air of the Obsidian Room, but for Audrey, it felt like a battlefield. Audrey, William, and Jean-Luc rented a nondescript SUV. They didn't want to alert the local plant managers who were likely Richard's cronies. The Stanton Steel Mill was a behemoth of corrugated iron and smokestacks, sitting on the edge of a dying town. The parking lot was half empty. Richard's efficiencies had cost 2,000 jobs here. They parked outside the chain-link fence. "How do we get in?" Jean-Luc asked, eyeing the security guard at the gate. "We don't go through the front door," Audrey said. "We go to the local dive bar." William looked confused. "The bar? Shift change is at 4 p.m., Audrey explained. "That's where the workers go. If you want the truth about a company, you don't ask the managers. You ask the people who sweep the floors." They drove to the Rusty Bucket, a dimly lit tavern a mile down the road. Inside it was quiet. A group of men in grime-stained coveralls sat at the bar nursing cheap beers. They looked tired, defeated. Audrey walked in. She was still wearing her suit, which drew immediate hostile stares. To them, she was just another suit from corporate, coming to cut their benefits. She sat at the bar. "Round for the house," she told the bartender. "We don't want your charity." A large man with a grey beard grunted. He had a bandage on his arm. "You from Apex? You here to tell us the pension fund is gone?" Audrey turned to him. "I'm Audrey Galloway. I'm the one who fired Richard Blackwood." The room went silent. The man squinted at her. "You're the waitress, the one on the news." "I am." The tension broke, replaced by a cautious curiosity. The man extended a callous hand. "Name's Frank, union rep, the one Blackwood laughed at." Audrey shook his hand firmly. "I'm here to find out why, Frank. I need to know what he did here. The real story." Frank looked around, then lowered his voice. "You want to know? Come with me." Frank led them out the back door to his truck. He pulled out a stack of papers from the glove compartment. They were crumpled, stained with oil. "He didn't just cut the pensions," Frank said, his voice trembling with rage. "He cut the filtration maintenance, the scrubbers on the smokestacks, They cost $1 million a year to run. Richard turned them off 6 months ago to boost the quarterly EBITDA. Audrey felt sick. But that's illegal. That releases carcinogens directly into the air. We know, Frank said. Look at this. He handed her a map of the town. There were red X's marked on dozens of houses. These are the guys who've gotten sick in the last 3 months, Frank said. Respiratory issues. Strange rashes. My own kid. She's got a cough that won't go away. We tried to report it to the EPA, but the reports disappear. Richard has someone on the inside, or he's bribing the inspectors. He's poisoning the town to save $1 million, William whispered, horrified. My God, this isn't just fraud, this is eco-terrorism. We need proof, Audrey said. Hard proof, not just a map. I can get you in, Frank said, but the logbooks for the filtration systems are in the main control room. Only the plant manager has the key, and he's Blackwood's nephew. Blackwood's nephew? Jean-Luc asked. Yeah, nasty piece of work. Keeps a gun in his desk. Audrey looked at her grandfather. We have to go in. It's dangerous, William warned. I served tables for 6 months with blisters on my feet while my brother was sick, Audrey said, her eyes hard. I'm not afraid of a bully. They formulated a plan. Frank would create a distraction, a safety drill malfunction in Sector 4. While the management was distracted, Audrey and Jean-Luc would slip into the admin building. At 5:30 p.m., the alarm blared. Whoop whoop, Sector 4, fire hazard. The PA system screamed. Chaos erupted. Workers ran toward the assembly points. The managers panicked, rushed out of their air-conditioned offices. Audrey and Jean-Luc sprinted across the loading dock. They found the office marked Plant Manager. It was locked. Allow me, Jean-Luc said. He pulled a set of lockpicks from his pocket. Audrey raised an eyebrow. A good maitre d' has many skills. Jean-Luc winked. Click. The door swung open. They rushed inside. Audrey went straight to the filing cabinet. Locked. Jean-Luc went to work on it. Audrey booted up the computer. She guessed the password. It was likely arrogant. She typed Blackwood 1. Access denied. She typed money. Access denied. She typed winner. Access granted. Predictable, she muttered. She navigated to the maintenance logs. There it was, a folder labeled filtration_override. She opened it. It was a direct order signed by Richard Blackwood, authorizing the shutdown of the scrubbers and the falsification of the EPA reports. I got it, Audrey said, jamming a USB drive into the port. I'm downloading it. Hurry, Jean-Luc said. Someone is coming. Heavy boots stomped down the hallway. Who triggered the damn alarm? It's a false positive, a voice shouted. The door handle jiggled. Then it was kicked open. Standing there was a man who looked like a younger, beefier version of Richard. The nephew. And he was holding a security baton? Well, well, the nephew sneered. The waitress. Richard said you might be stupid enough to come here. He stepped into the room blocking the exit. 2 large security guards appeared behind him. Hand over the drive, the nephew demanded. Audrey pulled the USB drive out. She held it tight. This proves everything. You're poisoning these people. Business has costs, the nephew shrugged. Now give it to me, or we'll bury you in the scrap yard. No one looks for missing persons in a smelter. Jean-Luc stepped in front of Audrey. He assumed a fighting stance, not the stance of a waiter, but something disciplined. Boxing. Jean-Luc, Audrey said. I was the middleweight champion of the French Navy in 1995, Jean-Luc said calmly. Audrey, run. Jean-Luc lunged. He hit the first guard with a precise jab to the throat. The guard gagged and dropped. The nephew swung the baton, but Jean-Luc ducked and landed a body blow that doubled him over. Go! Jean-Luc shouted. Audrey bolted. She dodged the second guard and sprinted down the hallway. She burst out the back door into the cold Ohio night. Frank was waiting in the truck engine running. William was in the passenger seat. "Get in!" William yelled. Audrey dove into the back seat, just as the nephew stumbled out the door, shouting into his radio. "Drive!" Audrey screamed. Frank floored it. The truck spun out gravel, spraying and roared onto the highway. Audrey clutched the USB drive to her chest. She was shaking. "Did you get it?" William asked. "I got it," Audrey said, catching her breath. "We have him. We have the smoking gun." "Jean-Luc?" William asked, looking back. He stayed behind to buy me time," Audrey said, tears pricking her eyes. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "I am currently detained in the security office. Do not worry. I have already called the state troopers and reported a hostage situation. See you in New York." J.L. Audrey laughed a sound of pure relief. "He's okay. He's calling the cavalry." Now they just had to get back to New York before the shareholder meeting at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. The Plaza Hotel ballroom buzzed with the electric hum of greed. Richard Blackwood stood on stage, a televangelist of profit, screaming at the shareholders. "The Galloways are destroying your portfolio," Richard bellowed, pointing at the graphs. "Vote them out and I'll double the stock by Christmas." Behind him, the digital vote tally climbed 48%, 49%. He was seconds away from stealing the company back. Then the double doors crashed open. Audrey walked in, flanked by William Frank, the union rep, and two grim-faced FBI agents. The room fell dead silent. "Ms. Galloway," Richard sneered into the microphone, "here to witness your eviction. No Richard," Audrey said, her voice cutting through the noise. "I'm here to show them the cost of your dividends." She climbed the stage and plugged the stolen USB drive into the presentation laptop. The stock charts vanished. In their place appeared a map of the Ohio town covered in red X's, followed by a scanned document, filtration_override_auth_R.Blackwood. "Richard disabled the safety filters to save $1.2 million, Audrey announced to the horrified crowd. In exchange, he poisoned 300 families. He gave children cancer to pad the quarterly report. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Richard stammered, backing away. "It's a lie, it's a fake. It's a federal crime," the lead FBI agent said, stepping into the spotlight. "Richard Blackwood, you are under arrest for environmental tampering and reckless endangerment." As the handcuffs clicked, Richard looked at Audrey with pure hate. "You're nothing," he spat. "Just a waitress." Audrey smiled, cold and sharp. "I am, and I just took out the trash." As Richard was dragged away, Audrey took the podium. She didn't talk about stock prices. She pointed to Frank. "This company is broken," she told the investors. "We fix it by listening to the people who build it, not the ones who bleed it. Effective immediately, Frank has a seat on the board. We are turning the filters back on." 6 months later, Apex Meridian was thriving. In the company cafeteria, a new intern looked up in shock as the CEO approached his table with a pot of coffee. "Ms. Galloway," he asked, "what are you doing?" "Leading," Audrey said, pouring him a cup. "And serving." 6 months later, Apex Meridian's stock had recovered. In fact, it was higher than ever. The ethical pivot had attracted a new wave of investors. Audrey sat in her office. She was reviewing the scholarship fund applications for the children of the Ohio plant workers. Jean-Luc walked in, wearing a sharp suit. He was now the VP of operations, and he ran the tightest ship in the industry. "Your table is ready, Madame CEO." Jean-Luc smiled. "I'm not hungry, Jean-Luc. Not for you to eat," he corrected. "For you to visit." They went down to the lobby. The company cafeteria had been renovated. It was no longer a grim basement. It was beautiful, filled with light. Audrey walked to the service station. She picked up a coffee pot. She walked out among the tables where the interns, the janitors, and the junior analysts were eating. "Coffee?" Audrey asked a young, terrified intern. "Ms. Galloway, you're serving coffee." "The best way to lead," Audrey said, pouring the cup, "is to serve." And that is the story of how a waitress took down a billionaire tyrant. It's a reminder that true power isn't about the suit you wear or the money you have. It's about how you treat people when you think no one is watching. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold with a side of forensic accounting, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. What would you have done if you were in Audrey's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.